1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Woo!
Hello guys and welcome back to this one. So today we are going to be getting into the brute force solution and we're going to be looking at the code explanation and how I'm beginning to see how it makes sense. But obviously, as always, we are not going to get the full picture here. We are going to get into the graphical illustration and the debugger tool to basically help us harness and show what um, we have here. But today's video is just going to show us what individual sections and blocks of the code mean, and basically an inkling of idea of how it's going to solve the problem that we have here today. So so we see that, yeah, okay, let me zoom in. Yeah, so we can see here, sorry. So we start with the function here. So we say merge sorted files, brute force. So we have if files within a file. I think we could also go further to see what. Can I also go further to see minutes? Right? If I'm not mistaken, yeah. So yeah. So we can go further to type it fully. Now so we call it the indexes, yeah, the indices, right? And we define it with a uh list of integers, right? And that integer is going to be 0 times the length of whatever amount of files we are bringing in or is coming into the length of basically the length of these files over here, right? So basically the length of this entire file is basically telling us the amount of files within the file. So we increase zeros for that, and we then say while true. So we create the smallest value and the smallest file. So basically these are holders for, say, the smallest value for the first instance is going to be 1, and the smallest file, right, for the first instance is going to be and that instance should be 1 because it holds the smallest file is basically the file that holds the smallest value. So at this instance 1 is the smallest value here, so that will be what we eventually hold here. Now we call within that, when we define this guy, so now say for, so basically we call here the for loop. We say for a file index in range length files. So the length of the files is 3, right? And because the length of the files is 3, right, what we now get to see is that we see, okay, sorry, so the length of files is 3, and basically what we then see is that that's basically the count of all the files here. So that means you're going to be going through all these files while we go through this for loop. Now we check if the index of the files is greater than the length of the file. So basically the index at that file, right? So basically coming here and saying, oh, with this index is here, it's a file of, it's a list of zeros, so it's going to be 000, right, when we multiply it by 3. So basically we come here and see the indexes, and we're just going to check whether if this 0 has grown enough to be greater than 3, which is going to be the length of these files over here when we do length file at that index. So basically if we check any of these files, right, this is 3, this is 3, so the length of any of these files, if it has got, if the indexes, because what this indexes tries to do is to hold these values, tries to hold the index where the iteration is at that moment in context. So basically if that outgrows, that means we then continue. So yeah, that might not make sense now. Graphical illustration again. So we see current files equals to file. So basically what we're trying to do here is that we're trying to find the exact head at the index. So basically we are trying to see, oh, at this index. So basically we find the index that we are at. So basically say file index, say maybe we are at the index of 1, right? Files at index of 1, and then we check indexes. So you say right now that it's 0. So obviously this will be file 1 index 1. So yeah, they're basically trying to pick out the current file that we are in. Then we check if the smallest value is smaller than it, or if it is none, then we can make that current value the smallest value, and then make its file the smallest file, right, by calling that index to it. Now, after going through that, we get our for loop done, and then we come out and say if smallest value is none, we should break. So basically, if we don't find any value to be put in the smallest value, that means there's nothing that was in any of these files, right? Then we go ahead to say print smallest value. So we print out the smallest value, as we have it in context, and then we increase the smallest file to +1, so that when we get to that file, the index that we find will be the next index. And that's basically it. So that's basically for the code, what's it called, the code explanation bit of it. So next up, we are going to be looking at seeing how this then applies on a graphical illustration, so everything begins to make sense. So that's the next bit. This would be for someone that probably has done this before, has an in-depth idea, that will understand what's happened, as I've been trying to explain here. But yeah, graphical illustration, we bring everything home. So see you on the next one. Muchas gracias. Bye.